lovely to see you again, Jack.
My pleasure.
As you know, it's George, Steve and I are just over here on a 3-week tour of the southern states. We're big blues fans, as we know. We met at the King Biscuit Blues Festival in Arkansas a couple of years ago. So we just wanted to have a chat with some interesting people along the way for our little video blog. And you're particularly interesting because you have an encyclopedic knowledge of the blues, especially Louisiana blues. So would you mind just telling us how it all came about from growing up and being born and bred in Louisiana?
Not at all. It's great to have y'all back. Welcome to South Louisiana and happy Mardi Gras. As I was saying earlier, I've just managed to Forrest Gump my way through one blues community after another since I was a child. As I told you yesterday, I'm originally from deep in rural Alabama, and we moved to Baton Rouge when I was 2 years old, so I called Baton Rouge home. But my entire life, every year, 2 or 3 times, visited family back in the little bitty town in rural Alabama, where my folks grew up. And my dad's father ran some cattle. He was a really diverse, interesting man. He was a barber. He had the town barber shop, but it was a little bitty town, so they were only open 3 days a week. And then he raised cattle and he raised some different crops. And then this was on some property about 15 miles outside of the little bitty town. So we're talking even deeper into rural Alabama. And he had a little store, which could only be loosely described as a store. He sold a few loaves of bread, some jars of sausages and peanut butter. The real reason for having the store was these 2 black guys that worked for him made moonshine whiskey and homemade wine, and that was sold under the counter. One of these guys, whose name was Honey Pie Edwards, I never knew his real name.
Okay.
The other one was Boo.
Good blues name.
And they lived on adjacent little pieces of land to my grandfather's. And one of Honey Pie's wife was the first cousin of Muddy Waters. So Muddy Waters would come through there 2 or 3 times a year when he was playing the juke joints on the Chitlin circuit.
Right.
And back in those days, we're talking 40s, 50s, 60s, they couldn't stay in the hotels because it was too deeply entrenched in racism then.
Oh, that was because
they would have to find a place to stay. Well, that was a natural because he had family there. So, as I said, 2 or 3 times a year, they would stay there at Honey Pie's house. And then during the day, they would come over and hang out at the little store, especially if it was wintertime because they had a big potbelly stove and they had a jukebox. And on the weekends, it was a juke joint.
Right.
And my dad and I would camp. We would camp out on the property about a quarter of a mile behind the store. So on Friday and Saturday and Sunday nights, we could literally lay around our campfire and hear Muddy Waters singing.
Wow.
And if they didn't have a band, we could hear the jukebox. Well, I guess the first time I met Muddy Waters, I think I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I already knew Slim Harpo because he came in my uncle's gas station on Gummer Street, right across from Phil Brady's. And my uncle was pretty progressive for the times because he actually gave Slim Harpo a account to charge his gas there because Slim at this time was not full-time in the music business. He had 2 or 3 trucks and he hauls scrap metal. So
was that because he couldn't make money out of music?
Exactly. Yeah. So I would see Slim Harpo typically 3 or 4 times a week at my uncle's gas station. So I think I was about 9 years old when one day, I walked in the little store because my folks were going off to do something. It was like our daycare center. And Boo goes, "Oh, I'm glad you came by." He goes, "You know that guy's records that you like to play on the jukebox, Muddy Waters?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I want you to meet him. This is him right here." So he walked over and he introduced me to him, Wow. And,
Marvelous.
I mean, I was just astounded to meet somebody that played on a jukebox,
Of course.
And so he goes, "So you like my records, homeboy?" I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Although I do have to say, I like the way Slim Harpo does his song, I'm a King Bee, a little better than you do. And his jaw kind of dropped, and then he just busted out laughing. He goes, boo, you hear what this little motherfucker just said? So I have the distinction of the first time I was called a motherfucker, pardon my French, it was by Muddy Waters.
Oh, what a great story, Jack. What a great...
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Slim Harpo there, and I think you said to us earlier on that, I didn't know this, but Rolling Stones had did 3 covers of Slim Harpo songs on their first album.
They did.
And,
they
and this
did.
was one of the things that fascinated us when we came on this trip, that black musicians couldn't get their music played on essentially white American radio.
Except on the black radio
And it
stations.
took a bunch of white middle-class guys from England, like the Stones, to come over here, take their music, cover it, as they've obviously done. Could you just tell us a little bit about
which
Slim?
kind of created rock and roll, but they
Yep.
were doing the blues. It was just, that was the way it sounded, the way they did it.
Yeah.
You know, that was actually lesson number 2 of Moe's Whispering Smith with, it's all the blues, baby.
Yeah.
So yes, I know it was Shake Your Hips, I'm a King Bee, and I, for the life of me, can't remember what the other one was, but the Stones were huge Slim Harpo fans. And so right after this album came out, one day another local Baton Rouge blues musician, John Fred, of John Fred and the Playboys, his last name was Gourier, local French name. And John Fred had a #1 hit back in the late 60s, Judy in Disguise. And one day John Fred was coming out of the bank, and Slim Harpo was coming in, and he stopped John Fred, they were good buddies, and said, John, do you know who the Rolling Stones are? And he goes, well, yeah, I do. He goes, they're a band in England, you know, and they love your music. And he goes, look. And Slim Harpo held up a check for $25,000. And he goes, I just got this in the mail from the Rolling Stones yesterday. And he goes, I'm going in the bank to see if it's actually good. And the next day, Slim came by the gas station driving a brand new Cadillac.
Lovely. What a lovely story.
Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned a gentleman who worked at your father's gas station, I think it was, called Moe's Whispering Smith.
Correct.
Two things. One, how did he get his name? And 2, this is another thing that kind of plays along with the story we're trying to follow, is that he spent a lot of time playing music in Europe. And so just if you could just tell us a little bit about...
Yeah, Moe's was a beautiful, beautiful man. He was my mentor in terms of Baton Rouge blues. I had known him for 2 or 3 years. He had been working at my uncle's gas station right across the street from Phil Brady's, Moore's Gulf. And I just knew him as Moe's, the guy who worked at my uncle's gas station. And deep, deep voice, just, you know, like he was way down in a barrel or something when he would talk to you. And unbeknownst to me, he was an incredibly talented musician, guitar, harmonica, vocalist, and was part of the house band at Excello Records, not about 10 miles from where we're sitting right now. And they pumped out record after record back in the 50s and 60s and into the early 70s for Excello Records, which is, I'm wearing one of Slim Harpo's shirts, and it's one of my favorite ones because Slim's real name was James Moore. But I tell everybody, this is me.
Of course.
Yeah. So anyway, Moe's was a big part of those Swamp Blues records that were coming out of Excello Records, but I didn't know this at the time until one day, Saturday afternoon in football season, so the town was completely dead. It was just Moe's and me and my cousin Chico, who was my uncle's oldest son. We were the same age. We had been left in charge of the gas station, and we were listening to the radio because there was nothing going on. And my mom was a huge Elvis fan, so by de facto, I was a huge Elvis fan. And Elvis's song, Hound Dog, had just come out. It was just blowing up, running up the charts. And it came on the radio, and I was jumping around and jiving to that. Mose was watching and listening. You know, and when it was over, I said, man, Mose, isn't that a great song? He goes, well, yeah, it's a great song. He goes, but it's not actually Elvis's song.
Yeah.
And I was clueless. You know, I was a young, smart aleck, and I knew nothing about, you know, the fact that Elvis was basically ripping off old blues artists. And it was a Arthur Big Boy Crudup. I know it was a Big Mama Thornton song that Hound Dog was originally. And I had never heard it because it wasn't played on the radio stations that we were listening to at the time. So he tried to explain it to me. It's a Big Mama Thornton song. It's not an Elvis song, you know. Well, again, me being the young, naive, smart aleck I was, I literally asked Mose, what do you know about music, you know, in the first place? And he goes, well, okay, I'll just sit right here. And he walked to his car, which is about 10 yards away, and opened the trunk, and he pulls out this guitar and an amp. He comes over and hooks it up, and he put his little harmonica holder around his neck, and boom, starts off playing the Texas Flood. And as I said yesterday, it was literally a jaw-dropping moment. I had never heard somebody play music live that sounded just like what was being played on the radio. And so he went through the whole song, and then when he got done, he just looked at us, and both of us were just in awe, and he chuckles and he goes, there's your lesson number one, fellas. Respect the blues. You know?
Great.
And his voice, I mean, well, you heard him say, he could just sing the bottom out of a note, just incredibly talented. I knew him till he died, I think 1981. We continued to work together at a couple of different stations till I graduated from high school and went to the Navy. And then when I came back, they were opening Tabby's Blues Box in Baton Rouge, which was a haven for all the local Baton Rouge blues guys, his contemporaries, Arthur Guitar Kelly, Tabby Thomas, Lightning Slim, Lonesome Sundown, Clarence Edwards, Rayful Neal, who begat Kenny Neal, who's an international star today. And so again, I just managed to Forrest Gump my way into this.
And through Mose, did you have experience of going to juke joints in the Bayou?
Yeah, well, Tabby's Blues Box immediately became my primary hangout.
Right.
Any night they were open, there would be at least 5 or 6 of those guys in there who were world-class musicians. And Silas Hogan had a son, Sam, who is a world-class, phenomenal musician, can play anything. He's still with us today, I'm happy to say. He still comes to our Blues Society events and plays. He's just a local treasure.
What's nice, Jack, is that you had a total respect for the blues and Mose's craft, but he also had respect for you as a young white boy growing up in Louisiana with total respect for essentially black music.
I mean, all those guys did. I mean, they would just talk to me like I was another adult, because, you know, the gas station kind of became a hangout for Moses' peers. Most Saturday afternoons throughout football season, when there was nothing going on in town, Mose would start a jam. And those guys that I named would show up, and they would sit. Charles Brown, the piano player, lived in Baton Rouge for a long time. He would show up numerous times to jam with those guys.
I think you told us a story on the way out here that I think it was Mose took you to a juke joint and you almost had to go undercover.
Oh, yeah, very much so. That was at the Alligator Bayou Bar, which is about 10, 15 miles outside of Baton Rouge, way back up in the woods, as all juke joints should rightfully be. And at the time, it was purely a black juke joint, and it was the 4th of July. And it was the first time my parents had gone out of town and left me unsupervised. I was about 14. And so Mose told me about it. I said, well, I would love to go, Mose. So he said, well, sure, I'll take you. And as we were driving in and he started realizing, oh, it's just going to be me driving up with this little white kid and all these black guys. I'm not sure how this is going to go over. So he had just come back from a tour over at Europe, and the last stop was in France. And so when we get to the parking lot, he goes, okay. He pulled out this beret and he stuck it on my head because I had real platinum blonde hair at the time. And he goes, do not take this beret off. And if anybody questions your ethnicity, your answer will be, you're my high yellow nephew, which was a euphemism in the black community for someone who's got a lot of white blood in it.
Yeah, great. It's great.
And so everything went off without a hitch. It couldn't have been better, but it was one of the greatest musical experiences in my life because all those guys I named were there.
Marvelous.
A lot of them I didn't even know. Buddy Guy, his brothers Sam and Phil Guy, Rayful Neal, a bunch of his kids who were about my age, Kenny Neal, Rayful Neal Jr., Little Ray, Noel Neal, who went on to play with James Cotton. Ironically enough, Little Ray Neal played guitar for Big Mama Thornton.
Wow.
So I've been in this circle of blues life my entire life.
That's marvelous. What a great story. We talked to another musician in Nashville called John Bird, who plays essentially classic American country music and folk music. But he came up with an interesting point. He said he doesn't really make any money playing in the US. He only makes money when he goes on tour in Europe.
It's true.
And he's playing
today. It's still true.
Is that similar for blues musicians here?
Very much so. And I'll call a spade. It's racism. Even today, blues music is still looked upon as black music.
Yeah.
And there's a big part of the white community that.
Yeah.
It's not that they don't like it. I've had to explain to people over the years that a lot of the songs that especially when I was younger, back in the 60s and 70s, I can't tell you how many conversations I would have with people. Well, that song you like by the Rolling Stones, Time Is On My Side. Again, the cycle of life, just like Mose explained to me about Hound Dog, I would explain to them, that's an Irma Thomas song. A New Orleans singer that's the Rolling Stones loved, and the song the Animals are doing or the Kinks are doing, it's Slim Harpo's song or some other great blues musician guy that's just the way it sounds when they play it. It came out as rock and roll, but it's a blues song.
And I think there was another interesting piece on that you mentioned that I think it was Mose. He said when he went to play in Europe, he was treated with the utmost respect, well-paying gigs. Yet when he came back to the US, he came back to a segregated society.
It was an ongoing struggle for those guys because when they went to Europe, the racism factor didn't exist.
No,
they were just this phenomenal artist who was treated accordingly.
Yeah.
And a lot of them struggled with it. Mose did, became an alcoholic because, it was just, he'd go over there and his world would just improve 1,000%. And then he would come back and then like he would tell me, I have to go around to the back of the gas station to your uncle's colored restroom instead of use the same one that everybody else does.